the idea that you're not small. And that's some idea that's hard to push away, because even Emerson said that a brick aspires to be something great. You see, that's what happens when each and every one of us logs in, that we become a brick. But we become a brick that aspires very much, like Emerson said, to be greater than what we are. And the internet, in a sense, provides us with that capability, that idea that we can right the wrongs of our societies, the idea that even allows us to validate ourselves with the concept that we can somehow be able to save people and planet by just the things we write. So I can understand why people write the things they do. I'm not here to judge the slant of your writing, or for that matter, why you write the things you do. That's not the whole purpose. What I'm trying to do is go much deeper, peel off that veneer that forms the substrate of consciousness and dwell within that area that we have never dwelt before, that area whereby I can only call the zone of darkness. And let me explain to you what the zone of darkness has to do with the game that I developed once upon a time. Because I saw into the heart of darkness. I was able to see how an organization that had a mission to be good corrupted itself from within. And how is that possible? How is it possible when you put 10 people who are supposed to be the best? Naturally, logic would inform you, or what traditional common sense would suggest would be all of these people will be able to produce a higher measure of good as compared to putting 10 cretins to do the same type of job. But no, it became worse. I mean, I could put 10 brainless wonders in that job and still manage to get a comparative good of a factor of 100 or 1,000 against those guys that were really, really, really good or claimed to be good. That's because if you put really intelligent people into an environment, and it doesn't matter what environment it is, they don't have to be intelligent in the sense that they are book smart, but you could have that kind of intelligence like Beria, you know, who once was able to actually assert himself as a politician in Stalinist Russia. And this is not an easy thing. It's like playing musical chairs. Okay? I mean, you got your cabinet colleagues dying left, right, center, you know, forward. So you got to be somebody with a bit of what I call spirit to be the top dog. And you know, that's what happens. That's what happens when you put people into an environment where politics and power feature. They will begin to mythologize their own relevance, very much in a way that, you know, when you walk into, let's say, a place of worship, and I'm not referring to any denomination specifically, I'm referring to the whole idea of worshipping a higher being. The first thing that you notice is that that person that is supposed to be a conduit to the higher being is asserting not only himself, but he's asserting the idea of God. And when you combine that two ideas together, they become an estrogen. It becomes a powerful aphrodisiac that appeals to our sense of wanting to have that father figure, that belief that we are basically children that did not come from specks of dust or from what I call meteorite gunk, but we were actually special, that we are a new creation. Now it's far more easy to believe in that idea, that you're not space gunk, that you're actually a new creation, that you are special. Wow. That was what I saw in the game, midway in at least. I started to see people who were perfectly rational. But you know, through the years, they got high on their products. They believed the lies that they told others in order to mythologize their existence. For example, the Brotherhood controls a technology that I personally developed known as parallax time travel. Now let me explain to you what is parallax time travel. It is supposed to be an idea that is able to traverse people and communities and even whole societies from one part of space to another. Now that would seem simple, but we are talking about basically folding space, the ability to travel without being able to travel, the ability to go from A to B without moving. Now this was my idea. And you know, there's so much written on the whole idea of the parallax theory. And it comes up to like reams and reams of information. If I would just stack the amount of information that comes out from the internet explaining this whole concept, this idea, it would be able to fill up, let's say, a minivan right up to the brim, okay? If it's all printed up in A4 pieces of paper. And 99.9999% of these people who confected that fragment of their insights as to what was time parallax believed in the whole idea. But you know what happened was that when Mr. A would come up with an idea, it would be encrusted further by Mr. B, and Mr. C would come in and then it would encrust another layer. So what happened is that it becomes a crystalline idea, like how you would culture pearls. I realized like when you come up with an idea, it just doesn't stay static, it is dynamic. That is to say that that idea takes on a life of its own and is able to refuel itself and establish a system that is so organic that sometimes it can feed itself for years. But the whole idea of time parallax was basically taken right out from my hands until it reached the point when I was in Munich a couple of years ago. And I was in a sci-fi gaming unit, and I was giving a speech in German. My German is not very good, and somebody spoke to me about time parallax, and he said to me that you know, is it true that it's linked to you guys being able to build pyramids in Luxor and things like that? And I said to myself, well, I'm not going to answer that question, because who came up with that idea that the Brotherhood had anything to do with building pyramids, or for that matter the idea that we were always around? Well, I didn't come up with that idea. What I'm trying to say is that thoughts, views, schools of thoughts and states of mind can be gazumped. They can be hijacked. Because what happened was that there was a group of people who came up with the idea of time parallax, and they mythologized it. They mythologized it very much in a way that leadership, and I'm speaking generically, frequently mythologizes its own legitimacy. Very much in a way the samurai suggested to the whole of Japan that it was the greatest idea on this planet to basically take their firearms and bury it and return to the age of the sword. Why? Why would anyone turn its back on technology? Unless, of course, that technology was able to undo the ritualized practice of those who perpetuated their power, influence. Because in the case of ancient Japan, the cult of the sword could be easily annulled with a firearm. You don't need to train 5 years how to wield a katana to shoot a rifle. And if you look throughout the course of history, you will find that for many millennia, I say that because there are certain slices of time that I can describe as a millennia in its own right. You will discover that basically the idea of elites and the whole idea by which they perpetuate their right to rule is based on preserving the status quo ante, very much in a way that I illustrated by recounting to you the story of the samurai and why they wanted to return back to the age of the sword, despite the fact that they had access to firearms. And the same idea basically proliferates. If you look at basically medieval politics, for example, When a crossbow came out, basically it was considered the weapon of what the Spanish would refer to as Diablo Alfafen, the Great Death, La Cajun, the coffin. And that's because the simple invention of the crossbow basically lowered down the threshold of martial competence to a point whereby a peasant that's probably cross-eyed could sort of like take down a knight who was a nobleman. The crossbow was able to basically penetrate through armor. And that meant that cavalry charges were more or less gone and done with, because this nobles believed that the cavalry was basically the equivalent of their tank system. They would just ride full throttle and then just ram into the lines and be assured that nobody could touch them, because from head to toe they were armored. But the crossbow basically nullified that competitive advantage. And because the crossbow was able to do that, those knights did exactly the same thing as what the samurais did. They said, hey, we're not going to fight this way, because you're getting peasants with no training. They don't even have any heritage at all. All they can do is point a bloody stick at us with a bloody 200-pound tension bow, and bam, we're finished. So we're not having it. So they petitioned basically Pius II, I think, and he was basically the Pope. Now the Pope during those days was basically the top man. He was basically like the CEO, something like the IMF honcho, the EU boss, Kofi Annan, all rolled up into one. He was basically the main power man. And the Pope actually issued out a moratorium that had the ire or threatened excommunication to any nation. And they said, we do not want this weapon to be released to the masses. Now, in effect, what they were saying is that we want to preserve the status quo ante. I want to explain to you the status quo ante. Why is it so important to preserve it? Why is it so important to the point whereby it occupies a linchpin, very much like a hub of a wheel, and how the spokes will converge upon that point to give it the necessary support that allows the wheel of life to turn? How is it possible? Because when you think about the whole idea of elitism, it is based on the idea of special knowledge. The idea that if you go through a certain program, then you would be the chosen one.